The winter of 1881 arrived in Montana like a merciless enemy. The wind howled across the frozen valley, carrying snow that buried roads, fences, and forgotten dreams beneath thick layers of ice. Travelers disappeared in storms. Ranches struggled to survive. Every sunrise became another battle against hunger, loneliness, and the cold. At the far edge of the valley stood Harper Ranch. Years ago, people had called it the pride of Montana. Now it looked like a ghost of its former self. A wooden farmhouse leaned slightly under the weight of countless winters. The old barn creaked with every gust of wind. Broken fences stretched across snow-covered fields, where only a handful of thin cattle searched desperately for grass beneath the frozen ground. Everything about the ranch whispered the same painful truth. It was running out of time. Standing quietly beside the ranch's old wooden fence was a woman who looked as broken as the land before her. Her name was Clara Wilson. She was 33 years old, a widow, a mother, a survivor. Her brown wool coat was torn at the sleeves and patched in several places. Her faded frontier dress had been sewn together so many times that almost every stitch told the story of another hardship. Her worn leather boots were cracked from months of walking through snow and mud, yet despite everything, she still stood with dignity. Beside her stood her 12-year-old son, Ben. His patched jacket hung loosely over his thin shoulders. His trousers were torn at both knees, and his old boots had nearly lost their soles. But his eyes never left his mother. Even at 12 years old, he had already decided that protecting her was his responsibility. Holding Clara's hand was little Lily, only 9 years old. Her faded blue dress was covered with patches, hidden beneath a torn wool shawl far too thin for the Montana winter. Her cheeks were red from the freezing wind, but she never complained. Instead she quietly asked, "Mother, is this where we'll finally stop running?" Clara looked toward the lonely ranch. For several seconds, she couldn't answer, because she honestly didn't know. Finally she whispered, "I pray it is." She didn't realize that someone was watching them from the porch of the farmhouse. A man carrying wounds no one else could see. His name was Thomas Harper. Thomas had once been one of the happiest ranchers in Montana. Harper Ranch wasn't simply his business. It was the dream he had built with his wife. Together they planted every tree, built every fence, raised every calf. Every corner of the ranch reminded him of the woman he had loved, until 2 winters ago, she became ill. Within weeks, she was gone. Since then Harper Ranch had slowly stopped feeling like home. Every room reminded Thomas of what he had lost. He buried himself in work because silence hurt too much. Every morning before sunrise he repaired broken fences, fed hungry cattle, chopped frozen firewood, worked until his hands bled. Yet no matter how hard he fought, winter always seemed stronger. Debt kept growing, the cattle kept dying, the ranch kept falling apart. Neighbors told him to sell, the bank warned him, but Thomas refused, because selling Harper Ranch meant losing the last piece of his wife. That morning he noticed 3 strangers standing outside the fence, a woman, a boy, a little girl. They looked exhausted. Their clothes revealed everything before they even spoke. They hadn't eaten properly for days. Thomas walked toward them slowly. Clara immediately straightened her posture. She refused to look like someone begging for mercy. "What brings you here?" Thomas asked. His voice was firm, but not unkind. Clara answered honestly, "I'm looking for work." Thomas looked toward Ben, then Lily. "Where's their father?" Clara lowered her eyes. "He died last winter." Silence filled the frozen air. Thomas nodded slowly. He understood loss better than anyone. "You came all this way on foot?" "Mostly, and if nobody hires you?" Clara forced a tired smile. "Then we'll keep walking until someone does." Ben quietly looked away. He knew his mother didn't truly believe those words anymore. Thomas noticed. He also noticed Lily shivering while trying to hide it. Something inside him broke. He remembered his wife once telling him, "When God sends someone to your gate, don't ask why they came, ask why he sent them to you." Those words returned after 2 long years. Thomas looked back toward the lonely farmhouse. It suddenly felt emptier than ever. Then he looked at Clara. "I need help." She frowned. "With what?" "My house." Clara hesitated. "I don't accept charity." Thomas almost smiled for the first time in months. "Good, neither do I." He stepped closer. "This is work. You cook, you clean, you help keep the house alive." Clara remained silent. Thomas then looked directly at Ben and Lily, and quietly said the words that would change all their lives. "Help me with the house." He paused. "And your kids won't go hungry." The cold wind stopped. Even the silence felt different. Clara looked at her children. Ben gave the smallest nod. Lily squeezed her mother's hand. For the first time in many months, hope stood before them. Clara reached out. Thomas shook her hand. Neither of them realized that far across the valley, another man was watching Harper Ranch through a spyglass, a wealthy landowner with cold eyes and darker intentions, Richard Caldwell. And when he saw Clara enter Harper Ranch, he whispered only one sentence. Everything is about to become much more difficult. The first morning Clara Wilson woke inside Harper Ranch, she didn't see a house. She saw a family that had forgotten how to live. Before sunrise, while the rest of the ranch still slept, she quietly lit the old fireplace. She swept the dusty wooden floors, repaired torn curtains with a needle she carried in her pocket, and cooked the last handful of flour into fresh bread. When Thomas entered the kitchen, he stopped in the doorway, for the first time in nearly 2 years. The farmhouse smelled like home. His children, James and Emma, he sat at the table smiling while Lily laughed at something Ben had whispered. It was such an ordinary moment, yet it felt like a miracle. Thomas realized the house wasn't quieter because his wife was gone. It had become quiet because everyone had stopped living. Over the following weeks, Harper Ranch slowly began to change. Ben worked beside Thomas from sunrise until dusk, learning how to repair fences, care for cattle, and mend broken tools. Thomas never treated him like hired help. He taught him like a father teaching his own son. One freezing afternoon, Ben slipped while carrying a heavy fence post. Thomas grabbed him before he hit the ground. "You don't have to carry everything alone," Thomas said. Ben lowered his head. "I promised my mother I'd become the man of the family." Thomas placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. "You've already made her proud. But even the strongest men need someone beside them." For the first time since his father's death, Ben smiled. Meanwhile, Lily transformed the farmhouse without even realizing it. She filled the empty rooms with laughter, picked tiny wildflowers whenever the snow melted for a few hours, and placed them beside the photograph of Thomas's late wife. One evening, Thomas noticed the flowers. "Why did you put them there?" he asked softly. Lily answered with complete innocence. "Because no one should ever feel forgotten." Thomas couldn't speak, his eyes filled with tears, but peace never lasts forever. Miles away, Richard Caldwell watched Harper Ranch through his office window. He was one of the wealthiest landowners in Montana. People respected him, others feared him. Only a handful knew the truth. Richard had secretly been buying ranches across the valley, because he believed a major railroad would soon pass through the area. Harper Ranch stood on the most valuable piece of land, and Thomas was the only rancher refusing to sell. Richard wasn't interested in making an offer anymore. He wanted Thomas broken. That night, several masked riders cut sections of Harper Ranch's fencing. By morning, dozens of cattle had escaped into the mountains. Thomas's face turned pale. "If we lose them, we lose everything." Without waiting another second, Ben jumped onto a horse. "I'm coming." "No," Thomas said. "It's dangerous." Ben looked him straight in the eyes. "This ranch feeds my mother and my sister too." Thomas nodded. "Then stay close." For hours they searched through snow-covered forests and frozen valleys. Just when they found the herd, a terrified calf slipped through the ice of a frozen creek. Without thinking, Ben ran forward. The ice cracked beneath him. "Ben!" Thomas rushed toward the boy, but before he could reach him, Clara grabbed a long rope from her saddle, tied it around her waist, and crawled across the breaking ice. Every movement could have been her last. The freezing water spread beneath her hands. Another crack echoed through the valley. Thomas shouted, "Come back!" She ignored him. Finally, Clara reached Ben. She wrapped the rope around him. Thomas and the ranch hands pulled with everything they had. Seconds later, both Clara and Ben collapsed safely onto solid ground. Everyone stood frozen. Thomas looked at Clara with disbelief. "You could have died." Clara looked at Ben, who was shivering but alive. So could he. At that moment, Thomas understood something. This woman hadn't come to Harper Ranch looking for safety. She had become the person protecting everyone else. Days later, repairing storm damage inside the old barn, Clara discovered a loose floorboard. Beneath it lay a small iron box. Inside was a faded map and several legal papers signed years earlier by Thomas's father. The documents proved something Richard Caldwell had hidden for decades. Part of Harper Ranch legally included the only natural spring, capable of supplying water to thousands of acres during drought. Richard had forged neighboring land records years ago, hoping one day to claim the spring. Those papers exposed everything. Thomas immediately took the evidence to the county judge. Within days, Richard Caldwell's fraud was uncovered, his false claims collapsed. His attempt to seize Harper Ranch failed. For the first time in years, justice won. Spring arrived slowly, snow melted across the valley, green grass covered the hills once again, healthy cattle filled the fields. Harper Ranch was alive. One evening, Thomas stood beside the same old wooden fence where Clara had first arrived months earlier. She walked beside him, neither of them spoke for a long time. Finally Thomas smiled. "You came here looking for work." Clara laughed softly. "I remember." Thomas looked across the ranch. "I thought I was saving your family." He turned toward her. "But you were saving mine." At that moment, Ben, Lily, James and Emma came running across the field, laughing together like brothers and sisters, who had always belonged to one another. The lonely ranch no longer felt lonely. The broken fence had been rebuilt. The empty house had become a home again, and people across Montana would always remember the winter when a widower made one simple promise. "Help me with the house. Your kids won't go hungry." But by the time winter ended, everyone knew the truth. She hadn't just helped with the house, she had saved his ranch, and given his family a reason to live again. The end. If this story touched your heart, please like this video and subscribe to Meaningful Impact 2.1 for more unforgettable Wild West stories.